The stars had belonged to the HFY for 3,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever made them feel fear. They were the perfect hunters, standing 8 feet tall with bodies covered in black chitinous armor that could stop most weapons. And their forearms ended in blades sharp enough to cut through metal like it was soft butter. While their eyes could see in complete darkness, and their senses could track prey across entire continents. Archon Vrexthil stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Endless Hunt, watching the stars drift by as his fleet moved through the darkness between worlds. And he felt something he had not felt in over 200 years of hunting. He felt bored. The HFY had evolved on a harsh world where only the strongest survived. And they had taken that lesson to the stars, becoming the most feared species in the known galaxy, hunting other intelligent beings for sport and glory and the simple joy of the chase. The Galactic Council, that collection of weak species who thought talking could solve problems, had given up fighting the HFY long ago, and now every cycle they sent tributes to the hunting worlds, offering their strongest and fastest citizens to be hunted in the great arenas. It was easier than being destroyed completely, the Council had decided, and the HFY were happy to accept this arrangement because it gave them fresh prey without the trouble of conquering new worlds. Vrexthil had hunted them all. He had chased the Velkhori, those blue-skinned beings with powerful psychic abilities who could crush a heart with their minds. But he had learned to strike fast before they could focus their powers, and their heads now decorated his trophy hall. He had tracked the Draconth, massive reptilian creatures who breathed fire hot enough to melt stone. But he had studied their weakness to cold and trapped them in frozen canyons where their flames sputtered and died, and their scales now covered his armor. He had even hunted the crystallines, those strange silicon-based life forms who could shatter into 1,000 pieces and reform from a single shard. But he had learned to use acid that dissolved their crystal bodies completely, and their remains now powered his ship's engines. Every challenge had been met and overcome. Every prey species had been conquered and added to the great list of trophies. And now Vrexthil stood alone at the top with nothing left to prove. Great Archon, his second-in-command, called from the bridge below. A scout ship has returned from the unexplored regions with interesting news. Vrexthil turned slowly, his blade arms clicking together in the gesture his species used to show mild interest, because scout ships rarely brought anything worth his attention anymore. "Show me," he commanded, and a holographic display flickered to life before him. The scout captain appeared, a young HFY named Zethkra, who had proven herself clever enough to survive 3 hunting seasons. And her voice carried an unusual tone that Vrexthil could not quite identify. "We found a new species in the Orion Arm, Archon, in a system with a single yellow star and 8 planets, and they call their world Earth." The display changed to show the creatures, and Vrexthil felt his hunting instincts stir for the first time in decades as he examined this new potential prey. They were small, barely 6 feet tall at their largest, with soft pink or brown skin that had no armor or scales or protective covering of any kind, and their bodies looked fragile and weak, with no claws, no fangs, no venom glands, and no natural weapons whatsoever. "They call themselves humans," Zethkra continued, "and they have only recently developed space travel, managing to reach their nearest moon and send primitive probes to nearby planets." The hunting council had gathered now, drawn by word of new prey, and they watched the footage with growing amusement as humans went about their daily lives, walking on 2 legs, eating food with small blunt teeth, and communicating through vibrations in the air. "They are soft," one council member laughed, his mandibles clicking with derision. "They are slow," another added, watching a human run at speeds that any HFY child could easily surpass. "They are weak," a third declared, pointing to footage of humans struggling to lift objects that weigh barely a fraction of what a HFY could carry. Rexthel said nothing, continuing to watch the footage with growing intensity, and something in the back of his hunter's mind whispered a warning he could not quite understand. "There is more," Zethkra said, and her voice carried that strange tone again. Something Rexthel finally recognized as uncertainty. "And I think the council should see all of it before making any decisions." The footage continued, and now it showed something different. Humans were hunting. A group of them chased a large four-legged creature across an open plain. Not with speed, but with patience, following it hour after hour as the sun moved across their sky. Never stopping, never resting, just walking and jogging at a steady pace. The prey animal was faster, running ahead again and again, but it always had to stop to rest and cool down. And each time it stopped, the humans got a little closer, and the animal had to run again before it was ready. After many hours, the animal collapsed from exhaustion, unable to run anymore, and the humans finally caught up and killed it with simple, sharp rocks. "They are persistence hunters," Zethkra explained, "and they evolved to chase prey until it dies from exhaustion. Because while they are slower than almost everything on their world, they can keep moving longer than any other creature." The council was silent now, watching more footage. Humans building structures that reached into the sky. Humans creating weapons that could kill from great distances. Humans working together in groups of thousands and millions to accomplish tasks no individual could complete. Humans recovering from injuries that would kill most species. Their bodies healing broken bones and torn flesh with remarkable efficiency. And most disturbing of all, humans fighting each other in massive wars that killed millions of their own kind, then standing up afterward and rebuilding everything they had destroyed. "They are very violent," Zithkra reported, "and they have been fighting wars among themselves for their entire recorded history, developing increasingly powerful weapons with each generation." Rexthil leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the display. "How many of them are there?" he asked. "Current estimates suggest approximately 8 billion individuals on their home world alone, Archon." 8 billion. The number echoed through the council chamber. Most prey species numbered in the millions at most, carefully managed populations on carefully controlled worlds. But 8 billion was a number the Kethvari had never encountered. "They breed quickly," Zethkra added, "reaching maturity in less than 20 of their years and capable of reproducing throughout most of their adult lives." The council began discussing hunting strategies, excited by the prospect of new prey after so many years of the same old species. But Rexthel remained silent, watching the footage loop again and again. Something bothered him. The way the humans moved, the way they worked together, the way they never seemed to give up even when facing impossible odds. It all reminded him of something, but he could not quite place what it was. "We will send a harvester fleet," the council decided, "and we will collect specimens for the arena, and if they prove worthy prey, we will add their world to our hunting grounds." Rexthil finally spoke, his voice quiet but commanding immediate attention. "I will lead this hunt myself," he declared, and the council stared at him in surprise, because the great Archon had not personally led a harvest in over 50 years. "These creatures interest me," he explained, "and I want to see for myself what makes them survive on a world that seems designed to kill them at every opportunity." The fleet assembled within 3 cycles. Dozens of ships carrying thousands of hunters, all eager to test themselves against new prey. As they jumped into faster-than-light travel toward the distant yellow star, Rexthil stood alone in his chambers, studying the human footage one more time. And for reasons he could not explain, the greatest hunter in the galaxy felt the faintest whisper of something he had not experienced since he was a young warrior facing his first real hunt. It almost felt like the beginning of fear. But that was impossible, he told himself, because what could soft, slow, weak little creatures possibly do against the unstoppable Kethvari? He would soon find out just how wrong he was. The HFY harvester fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, just beyond the orbit of the 8th planet in the human solar system. And Archon Rex Thill immediately began planning the operation that would add Earth to his list of conquered worlds. Standard protocol was simple and worked perfectly on 412 different species across 3,000 years of hunting. First, they would send advance teams to isolated areas far from major population centers to establish hunting grounds and learn the terrain. Second, they would strike the leadership centers with overwhelming force, paralyzing any organized resistance before it could form. Third, they would collect the strongest specimens for the arena and leave the rest as a warning to any who might think of fighting back. The entire operation typically lasted 6 standard hours, and there was no reason to believe the humans would be any different from the hundreds of soft, weak species who had fallen before. Deploy advance teams to these coordinates, Rex Thill ordered, highlighting 3 locations on the planetary display. The first team would land in a vast desert region the humans called the Sahara, a place of endless sand and brutal heat that would remind the hunters of their home world. The second team would establish a position in something called the Siberian Wilderness, a frozen land covered in trees and snow where the humans rarely traveled. The third team would enter a massive forest region known as the Amazon, a jungle environment thick with life and perfect for testing hunting skills. 30 elite hunters in each team, 90 of the finest warriors the HFY had ever produced, armed with energy weapons and blade arms and centuries of experience. The dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere as darkness fell over the target regions, and Rex Thill settled in to wait for the reports that would confirm the success of another routine harvest. 3 hours passed. Then 4. Then 5. Arkan, his communications officer, reported with obvious confusion. "We have lost contact with all 3 advance teams." Rex Thill's blade arms clicked together sharply, a sign of irritation rather than concern, because communication failures happen sometimes when landing on new worlds with unfamiliar atmospheric conditions. "Send signal boosters and establish secondary communication channels," he ordered. Another hour passed with no response. "Deploy scanner drones to the team locations," Rex Thill commanded, and small automated probes launched from the fleet, screaming down through the atmosphere toward the 3 landing sites. The footage that returned made no sense. In the Sahara, the scanner found HFY bodies scattered across the sand, their armor pierced by small metal projectiles, their formations broken and scattered as if they had been attacked from multiple directions at once. In the Amazon, the drone found nothing at all, just empty jungle and abandoned equipment, with no sign of the hunters or any indication of where they might have gone. And in Siberia, the footage showed something that made even veteran HFY warriors stare in disbelief. The hunters had been tracked. Clear evidence in the snow told the story. A single set of human footprints circling the landing site for what must have been hours. Watching from a distance, studying patrol patterns, identifying weak points in the perimeter. Then the footprints moved closer, and the signs of violence began. "One human did this?" a council member asked, staring at the footage of fallen HFY warriors. The killing had been precise and methodical, starting with the sentries and working inward, using some kind of chemical explosive and those primitive metal projectile weapons the scout reports had mentioned. But the most disturbing discovery was the final kill. The squad leader who had been struck down from over a kilometer away, a single shot through the gap in his neck armor, where no human should have been able to aim. "I will investigate personally," Rex Thill declared. And no one dared argue with the Archon when his voice carried that particular edge of cold fury. His personal shuttle descended to the Siberian site, and Rex Thill stepped out into the frozen air, his breath misting before him as he surveyed the scene of impossible defeat. The snow told the entire story to eyes trained by 2 centuries of hunting. The human had arrived shortly after the HFY landed, probably drawn by the lights and sounds of the dropship. Instead of running or hiding like any sensible prey animal, the human had settled into a hidden position and watched, remaining motionless for hours in temperatures that should have killed such a fragile creature. The footprints showed incredible patience, the kind of patience Rexthyle had only seen in the most dangerous ambush predators, waiting and learning until the perfect moment arrived. Then the human had struck, not with wild violence but with calculated precision, eliminating threats in order of importance, conserving ammunition, using the terrain for cover, and never once making a mistake. And when the killing was done, the footprints led away into the forest, not running in fear but walking at a steady pace, conserving energy for whatever came next. Rexthyle followed the trail, his blade arms ready, his senses alert for any sign of the creature who had done this. The footprints eventually met up with others, at least a dozen more humans who had been waiting in the forest, and together they had moved toward the location where the main fleet was preparing to land. "They are not running," Rexthyle spoke into his communicator, and his voice carried something his warriors had never heard before. "And they are not hiding, and they are not surrendering." He paused, looking at the tracks that pointed like an arrow toward his fleet. "They are hunting us back." The words seemed impossible, ridiculous, laughable, because no species had ever hunted the HFY, not once in 3,000 years of galactic dominance. But the evidence was undeniable. Within hours, reports began flooding in from across the planet. Human military forces were mobilizing at a speed that defied everything the HFY knew about primitive species. Messages were being transmitted around the entire planet in seconds. Warnings and strategies and calls for unified resistance spreading faster than any HFY could have believed possible. And everywhere the fleet tried to establish a foothold, they met resistance. Not the panicked, disorganized resistance of prey animals trying to flee, but the calculated, coordinated resistance of predators defending their territory. Human weapons were primitive by galactic standards, simple chemical explosives and metal projectiles, but they were devastatingly effective against HFY armor that had been designed to stop energy weapons. Human soldiers fought in small groups that moved like hunting packs, communicating through electronic devices, coordinating attacks from multiple directions, retreating when outmatched and striking again when the advantage shifted. And they never stopped. When one group of humans was defeated, another took its place. When one defense line fell, two more formed behind it. When night came and the HFY expected the soft creatures to sleep, the humans attacked instead, using devices that let them see in the darkness and striking when the hunters least expected it. "How many have we killed?" Rexthyle demanded after the first full day of what should have been a 6-hour operation. "Approximately 12,000 humans, Archon." Rexthyle waited for the good news. "And our losses?" The communications officer hesitated, and that hesitation told Rexthyle everything he needed to know. 418 hunters dead, Archon, with another 200 wounded severely enough to require evacuation. 400 HFY in a single day, against a primitive species with no space travel and no energy weapons and no combat experience against galactic threats. "They learn too fast," the officer continued. "And every tactic that works once fails the second time because they adapt their defenses within hours. And they share information across their entire planet almost instantly." Rexthyle stared at the tactical display showing human military movements across the globe. They were not just defending anymore. They were surrounding the HFY landing sites, cutting off retreat paths, and preparing for something that looked very much like a coordinated counterattack. For the first time in his long and glorious hunting career, Archon Rexthyle faced a terrible realization. He had made a catastrophic miscalculation. These soft, slow, weak creatures were not prey at all. They were predators, just like the Kethvari, and they had simply been waiting for something worthy to hunt. The Great Archon looked at the planet below and understood that this was not going to be a harvest. This was going to be a war. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Kethvari were not certain they would win. The war lasted 2 years, and every single day of those 2 years taught the Kethvari something new about the species they had so badly underestimated. Archon Vrexthul had expected the conflict to end within weeks, perhaps a month at most, because that was how long it took for any species to realize they were outmatched and submit to Kethvari dominance. But humans did not submit. They did not surrender. They did not give up even when the situation seemed completely hopeless. And worst of all, they got better at fighting with every passing day. The first assumption that proved wrong was the idea that humans were fragile. Yes, their bodies could be damaged more easily than Kethvari armor. And yes, a single blade strike could end a human life. But what the hunters had not anticipated was the remarkable ability of human bodies to heal. Vrexthul watched footage of a human soldier who had lost an arm to a plasma blast. And instead of dying or becoming useless, the creature had received something called a prosthetic, a mechanical replacement that let him return to combat within months. Human doctors performed something called surgery, cutting open bodies to repair internal damage, replacing organs, reattaching limbs, and performing medical miracles the most galactic species considered impossible. They break so easily, one Kethvari scientist reported. But they have built their entire medical system around the assumption that broken things can be fixed. And they are remarkably good at fixing themselves. The second assumption that proved wrong was the idea that humans were slow. The Kethvari could sprint at speeds no human could match, covering short distances in explosive bursts that let them close with prey before it could react. But humans did not need to be fast because they had something far more terrifying. They had endurance. A Kethvari hunting party pursued a group of human soldiers through a mountain range, expecting to run them down within hours. But the humans just kept moving. They walked when they could not run. They crawled when they could not walk. They dragged themselves forward on their bellies when they could not crawl. After 3 days, the Kethvari hunting party collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies overheated and their energy reserves depleted. And the humans they had been chasing turned around and came back to finish them off. They call it persistence hunting, Vrexthul explained to the hunting council. And it is how they evolved to catch prey on their home world, not through speed, but through sheer stubborn refusal to stop. The third assumption that proved wrong was the idea that humans were weak. Individually, yes, a single human was no match for a single Kethvari, but humans never fought alone. They fought as pairs and squads and companies and battalions and armies. They fought as cities and nations, and eventually as an entire unified planet. Information that helped one group of humans was shared instantly with every other group through their electronic communication networks. So a tactic that worked against soldiers in one country would fail completely against soldiers on the opposite side of the planet. They developed specializations, with some humans becoming experts at long-distance killing, and others focusing on close combat, and still others dedicating themselves to medical support or communication or logistics. And they protected each other with a ferocity that stunned the Kethvari. Human soldiers threw themselves on explosive devices to save their companions. Human pilots crashed damaged aircraft into Kethvari positions rather than eject to safety. Human medics ran into active combat zones without weapons to drag wounded friends to safety. They are pack hunters, Vrexthul realized, and the pack is more important to them than any individual life, including their own. The fourth assumption that proved wrong was the idea that humans could not adapt to galactic technology. The first Kethvari energy weapons were captured within 2 months of the invasion beginning. taken from fallen hunters by human soldiers who had no idea what they were holding. By month 4, human scientists had figured out how the weapons worked. By month 6, human factories were producing copies. By month 8, they had improved the designs, making them lighter and more efficient and more powerful than the HFY originals. Impossible, the HFY weapons master declared when he examined a captured human-made plasma rifle. Because it took our species 400 years to develop this technology, and they have replicated and improved it in less than one. But it was not impossible for humans, because humans had spent their entire history stealing good ideas from each other and making them better. Every nation on their planet had done it. Every generation had done it. It was how they had gone from stone tools to nuclear weapons in less than 10,000 years. The war turned from a harvest into a nightmare. Human forces pushed the HFY back to their landing sites, then pushed them off the planet entirely, using weapons that grew more sophisticated with every passing month. Rexthel found himself fighting a defensive war for the first time in his entire career, something no HFY had done in 3,000 years. And then came the day that changed everything. Colonel Sarah Chun led the ambush personally, a trap so perfectly designed that Rexthel almost admired it even as his warriors died around him. She had led his convoy past 3 times, mapping their patrol route, identifying the vehicles that carried commanders, learning exactly when and where they would be most vulnerable. The attack came from 4 directions simultaneously, with explosives cutting off retreat and human soldiers pouring fire into the killing zone. Rexthel fought his way free, his blade arms cutting down any human who came too close. But a plasma bolt struck his left arm at the joint, severing it completely. He turned to face his attacker and found himself looking at Colonel Chun herself, a small human woman with cold eyes and a captured HFY blade in her hands. "You fight like HFY," he told her, because it was true, because she had the patience of a hunter and the precision of a killer. "No," Chun replied, driving the blade between the plates of his armor, "because you fight like prey that thinks it is a predator. But we have been the apex predator of our world for 200,000 years, and we just got complacent." The blade pierced something vital, and Rexthel felt his body failing, but his warriors managed to drag him to safety before Chun could finish the kill. He spent 3 months in a healing chamber, regrowing his arm and repairing the damage, and during that time, the war continued without him. Humans had captured HFY ships. Humans had learned to fly them. Humans were building their own ships now, ugly, brutal things that looked nothing like the elegant HFY designs, but flew just as fast and hit even harder. The Hunting Council demanded that Rexthel end this disaster, but he no longer knew how. Every advantage the HFY possessed, the humans found a way to counter. Every weakness the humans had, they found a way to overcome. And every day, more and more HFY hunters died on a world that was supposed to be easy prey. Rexthel stood before the council, with one arm still regenerating and a scar on his chest where Colonel Chun's blade had nearly killed him. "We cannot win this war through strength alone," he admitted, and the words tasted like poison in his mouth, "because they match us in strength and exceed us in numbers. We cannot win through speed," he continued, "because they will simply outlast us and strike when we are exhausted. We cannot win through technology," he added, "because they steal everything we use against them and turn it back upon us." "Then what do you suggest?" the High Matriarch demanded. Rexthel looked at the tactical display showing Earth, now surrounded by defense platforms built from salvaged HFY technology. "I suggest," he said slowly, "that for the first time in our history, we consider the possibility that we have found something we cannot hunt." The council erupted in outrage, but Rexthel stood firm. He had seen the humans fight. He had felt their blade in his chest. He had watched them refuse to die no matter what the HFY threw at them. And he understood now what the scout captain had tried to tell them at the very beginning. These creatures were not prey. They never had been. They were hunters, just like the HFY, and they had simply been waiting for worthy prey to find them. The question was no longer whether the HFY could conquer Earth. The question was whether they could survive long enough to escape it. The Galactic Council had watched the invasion of Earth with casual interest at first, expecting another routine harvest that would add a new species to the HFY hunting grounds. But as months turned into years and reports kept arriving of HFY defeats, that casual interest transformed into something else entirely: fear. Ambassador Velkith of the Velkari species stood before the council chamber, his blue skin pale with shock as he read the latest intelligence reports. "They are winning," he announced, and his words sent ripples of disbelief through the assembled representatives of 100 different species. "Impossible," the Draconth ambassador rumbled, smoke curling from his nostrils, "because no one wins against the HFY, and certainly not a primitive species with no galactic experience." But the evidence was undeniable. Human forces had pushed the HFY completely off their planet. Human ships now controlled their entire solar system. Human scientists had reverse-engineered faster-than-light travel from captured HFY vessels and were building their own fleet. "It is not just that they are winning," Velkith continued, "but how they are winning, because they do things that no species in the galaxy would ever consider." He activated a holographic display showing footage from what humans called the Battle of Titan. The HFY fleet had arrived at the largest moon of the planet Saturn, intending to establish a forward base from which to launch a counterattack against Earth. Admiral Yuki Tanaka commanded the Human Defense Force, a collection of hastily built ships that were outnumbered 4-1 and outgunned by an even larger margin. By every calculation the HFY made, the battle should have been over in less than an hour. Instead, it became the worst naval defeat in HFY history. Tanaka had studied every piece of captured data about HFY tactics, learning how they fought, how they thought, and most importantly, what they expected their enemies to do. She did none of those things. When the HFY advanced in their traditional formation, expecting the humans to retreat and fight a defensive battle, Tanaka ordered her ships to charge directly at the enemy. When the HFY spread out to encircle the smaller human force, Tanaka concentrated her ships into a single point and punched through their line. And when her flagship was crippled by enemy fire with its weapons destroyed and its engines failing, Tanaka ordered the crew to evacuate and then aimed the dying ship directly at the HFY command vessel. She rammed it. The collision destroyed both ships and killed the HFY fleet commander, throwing their entire force into chaos. Tanaka survived the evacuation and commanded the rest of the battle from a rescue shuttle, directing her remaining ships to exploit the confusion and destroy the scattered HFY vessels one by one. They crashed their own ship into the enemy, the Draconth ambassador said in disbelief, and they did it on purpose. "Yes," Velkith confirmed, "because humans do not appear to have a concept of proportional response, and when threatened, they respond with maximum force regardless of the cost to themselves." The footage continued, showing more examples of human military philosophy. Weapons that were designed not for precision but for destruction, missiles carrying nuclear warheads, railguns firing metal projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, kinetic bombardment platforms that drop tungsten rods from orbit. "They call those rods from God," Velkith explained, "and they can strike with the force of nuclear weapons without any radioactive contamination. Tactics that no civilized species would employ. Soldiers fighting to the death rather than surrendering. Pilots crashing damaged aircraft in enemy positions. Entire units sacrificing themselves to buy time for others to escape. They have a concept called the last stand," Velkith continued. where a small force holds a position against overwhelming odds, knowing they will certainly die. And they consider this heroic rather than wasteful. Technology that advanced at a pace the galaxy had never seen, with new weapons and ships and defensive systems appearing every few months, each one more powerful than the last. At current rates of development, Velketh concluded, human military technology will match our best within 5 years and exceed it within 10. The council sat in stunned silence. For 3,000 years, the HFY had been the dominant predators of the galaxy, keeping every other species in line through the threat of being hunted. Now a species that had been unknown 2 years ago was on the verge of defeating them. What do they want? The crystalline ambassador asked, their silicon body humming with anxiety. We do not know yet, Velketh admitted, but they have sent a message. He activated another display, and a human face appeared, a woman with gray hair and hard eyes who identified herself as Secretary General Martinez of something called the United Earth Government. To the Galactic Council, she said, speaking through a translator that converted her words into the common galactic language. We know you have been watching our conflict with the HFY, and we want you to understand something very clearly. She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly at each council member, despite the fact that it was a recorded message. We did not start this fight, but we will finish it, and we are prepared to take this war to the HFY homeworld, if necessary. Another pause. However, we would prefer peace, and we are willing to negotiate a settlement that benefits all parties involved. The message continued with specific terms. Return of all captured humans from HFY hunting grounds. Formal recognition of Earth as a sovereign world not subject to harvesting. Opening of diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. And most surprisingly of all, an offer to share human technology with any species that wish to end the tribute system. They want to help us fight the HFY, Velketh explained. Why would they do that? The Draconth ambassador demanded. Because they hate what the HFY represent, Velketh answered. And apparently, humans have very strong opinions about species that hunt intelligent beings for sport. The council debated for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The HFY had maintained their dominance through fear, but now a species existed that did not fear them. If the council sided with the HFY and lost, humans might decide that the entire galactic community was their enemy. If the council sided with humans and won, they would be free of HFY harvesting forever. The vote was unanimous. The Galactic Council formally recognized Earth as a sovereign world and offered to open diplomatic relations with humanity. Within weeks, human ambassadors arrived at Council Station, and to the surprise of everyone who met them, they were not the bloodthirsty warriors the galaxy expected. They were curious. They asked questions about everything. The histories of different species, the science behind galactic technology, the art and music and literature of alien cultures. They wanted to learn, to explore, to understand. We spent most of our history fighting each other, Ambassador James Chun explained. The son of the famous colonel who had nearly killed Archon Vrexthale, and we were running out of new things to discover on our own world. He smiled, and it was a strange expression that made several council members uncomfortable. The HFY did us a favor, actually, because they reminded us that the universe is full of challenges, and humans are very good at facing challenges. Back on Earth, a probe was being prepared for launch, carrying a simple message in every galactic language known. The probe's destination was the HFY homeworld. The message was simple. Return our people. Leave our system. Or we come for you next. Attached to the message were coordinates proving that humans had mapped the location of the HFY homeworld, a journey that should have taken decades without captured star charts. Humans had done it in 18 months. When the HFY Hunting Council received the message, they realized that the situation had passed the point of simple military defeat. They were facing a species that could not be intimidated, could not be outlasted, and could not be stopped. And that species was coming for them. Arkham Rex still stood before the hunting council for what he knew would be the last time. His regenerated arms still slightly paler than the rest of his body, and the scar on his chest, hidden beneath his ceremonial armor. The chamber was silent, every seat filled with the greatest hunters of the HFY species. All of them waiting to hear what their most decorated warrior had to say about the disaster that had befallen their people. "I have hunted for 217 years, Rexthol began, and in that time I have killed more prey than any HFY in recorded history." He paused, letting the weight of his accomplishments settle over the chamber. "I tell you this not to boast, but so you understand that what I am about to say comes from experience rather than fear." The council waited, their blade arms still, their eyes fixed on the Archon. "The humans are not prey," Rexthal declared, "and they never were. Not from the moment they evolved on their hostile little world." He activated a holographic display showing Earth, that blue and green planet that had caused them so much pain. "We saw soft flesh and assumed weakness, but we did not understand that their flesh heals faster than our armor can be repaired." Images appeared of human medical technology, doctors performing surgeries, patients recovering from wounds that would have killed any HFY. We saw short lives and assumed they could not plan. But we did not understand that their short lives make them desperate to accomplish things quickly. And that desperation drives them to innovate at speeds we cannot match. Images of human technological progress, showing centuries of development compressed into decades. Weapons evolving from simple projectiles to nuclear devices to spacecraft in less time than a HFY lived. We saw individual frailty and assumed collective weakness. But we did not understand that they are pack hunters, and the pack is everything to them. And they will sacrifice themselves without hesitation to protect others in their group. Images of human soldiers fighting and dying for each other, throwing themselves into danger to save companions, standing their ground against impossible odds. "They are not survivors," Rexthal continued, his voice growing stronger, "because survivors run and hide and wait for danger to pass." He looked around the chamber at the greatest hunters in the galaxy. "They are conquerors, just like us, and they had simply run out of things to conquer on their own world until we arrived and gave them a new challenge." The High Matriarch finally spoke, her voice dripping with the contempt of one who had never faced a human in battle. "Then, what do you suggest we do, Archon? Surrender to these soft little creatures who were throwing rocks at each other while we ruled the stars?" Rexthal turned to face her directly, something few HFY would dare to do. "I suggest we do something our species has never done in 3,000 years of galactic dominance." He let the pause stretch, making sure every member of the council heard his next words. "I suggest we make peace." The chamber erupted in outrage, blade arms clicking and voices raised in protest. But Rexthal stood firm until the noise subsided. "They have already offered terms," he reminded the council. "Return of captured humans, recognition of Earth as sovereign territory, and an end to hostilities." "And in exchange?" the matriarch demanded. "Nothing," Rexthal answered, "because they do not want tribute or territory or submission. They only want to be left alone to explore the galaxy as they see fit." "Then they are fools," the matriarch declared. "No," Rexthal replied. "They are practical, because they have already beaten us and they know that continuing the war benefits no one." He pulled up another image, this one from the prisoner exchange that had been negotiated through the Galactic Council. Human children were playing with a HFY youngling, tossing a round object back and forth in some kind of game. And the HFY child was losing because their blade arms were not designed for catching. But the humans did not mock their opponent or celebrate their advantage. Instead, they were teaching the youngling how to play, adjusting the rules to make the game fair. They found us terrifying for approximately 1 year, Rexthal explained. But now we are simply another species in a galaxy full of species. And they have already moved on to thinking about what comes next. We are no longer interesting to them as enemies, he added, because humans always want to be moving forward, always looking for the next challenge, the next discovery, the next adventure. The council stared at the image of children playing, trying to reconcile it with their image of the species that had defeated their finest warriors. What do they want from us, if not revenge? A council member asked. Rexthal almost smiled, that expression that looked so wrong on Kethvari features. They want to visit our hunting grounds, he said, because they have a concept called tourism, where they travel to dangerous places for enjoyment. The council was speechless. Their ambassador called our preserves, and I am quoting directly here, totally badass. And he asked if humans could pay to observe our hunts as long as no intelligent species were being targeted. They want to watch us hunt? The matriarch asked in disbelief. They want to participate if we allow it, Rexthal corrected, because apparently humans find dangerous activities entertaining. The debate continued for many hours, but Rexthal could see the council moving toward the inevitable conclusion. The Kethvari had maintained their dominance through the ability to destroy any species that opposed them, but that power was meaningless against humans who simply refused to be destroyed. Peace was not surrender, it was recognition of reality. And the reality was that the galaxy had changed forever the moment humans entered it. 6 months later, the treaty was signed on a space station orbiting between Earth and Mars. Archon Rexthal represented the Kethvari, and across the table sat General Sarah Chun, the woman who had nearly killed him and who now commanded all human military forces. You were a worthy opponent, Rexthal told her as they signed the documents. Chun looked at him with those cold eyes that had haunted his memories for 2 years. We were not opponents, she said, because opponents fight for sport or honor, and we were fighting for survival, which makes us much more dangerous. She smiled, and Rexthal finally understood why humans bared their teeth to show friendship, because it reminded other humans of what those teeth could do. But I am glad the fighting is over, Chung continued, because I have a son who has spent his entire childhood in wartime, and I want him to grow up in a galaxy where he can explore instead of battle. Rexthal thought of the Kethvari younglings, who had also grown up during the war, learning to fear humans instead of hunting prey. Perhaps our children can teach each other, he suggested. Chun nodded. My son is already planning to apply for the exchange program, she said, because he wants to learn Kethvari blade techniques, and he thinks your species is, and I am quoting directly, totally badass. Rexthal laughed, a sound that startled everyone in the room because Kethvari did not laugh. Perhaps there is hope for both our species, he said. The treaty ceremony was broadcast across the entire galaxy, and every species watched as the unstoppable hunters and the unconquerable humans shook hands and agreed to peace. On Earth, the celebration lasted for days, with humans cheering and dancing and looking up at the stars with wonder instead of fear. General Chun stood at the ceremony establishing the United Earth Space Command, looking out at a crowd that represented every nation on the planet unified for the first time in human history. We spent a long time fighting each other, she told them, and maybe we needed something to remind us what we could do together. Above her, human ships patrolled alongside Kethvari vessels, former enemies now working together to keep the peace. And beyond them, the stars waited, full of mysteries and wonders and dangers that humanity had never imagined. The Galactic Council had begun revising all their threat assessments, adding humans to the category of apex predators alongside the Kethvari. But humans were not interested in being feared. They were interested in everything else. Human scientists were already planning expeditions to distant stars. Human artists were incorporating alien influences into their work. Human children were learning galactic languages in school. And everywhere they went, humans asked questions, made friends, solved problems, and got into trouble that they somehow always managed to escape. The HFY had ruled the galaxy through fear for 3,000 years. Humans were about to change it through something far more powerful: curiosity. And nothing in the universe could stop that.